This episode of My Almost Midlife Crisis is brought to you by the Be Well, Be Safe, Be Happy, Eat Ice Cream podcast, which is one you should really be listening to. This podcast is for anyone that wants to live a happy, healthy, and fulfilled life. Go to trainingwithcoachbrad.com to listen to the episodes most relevant to you and get inspired by real life stories. Subscribe to Be Well, Be Safe, Be Happy, Eat Ice Cream podcast wherever you listen to your podcast and give the show a try. And for a limited time, I am so excited to offer a special promotion to my listeners. Mention you heard this ad on my Almost Midlife Crisis podcast and receive a free PDF copy, free, of Coach Brad's book, Mind Strong, a book that's all about elevating your life to the next level. Give it a try. What have you got to lose? Pun intended. Well, hello there, and welcome to My Almost Midlife Crisis, the show that dives into that tricky time in our lives when we're no longer young, but we aren't old yet either. I'm your host, Jennifer Villamil. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I mean, I will say that it's not my favorite holiday living in Chicago because it's always so busy with tourists and suburbanites, and they just leave trash everywhere and they have no regard for my neighborhood whatsoever. But hey, I hope that you are doing something fun to celebrate, like maybe having a great barbecue or maybe eating some apple pie. Yum. But this year, Independence Day has me thinking about my own independence. As a self-proclaimed independent woman, for the first time since I left my parents' nest at the age of 21, I am not financially independent, and it's bringing up all sorts of emotions. So if you've ever experienced having to depend on others for your well-being as an adult, then this one's for you. Let's dive in. I'll admit it. Okay, you got me. I am horrible at small talk and networking parties. Like, some people really excel in these spaces. I know people that it seems like they know pretty much everyone that exists because they are constantly networking. Like, when I moved to Chicago, I fell into this crowd that there was quite a few folks in it, and a lot of them were really good at networking. So no matter where we went, they would come out of the event with like multiple business cards. For example, we go to a charity event and I'm there, I'm dancing because, they always have like the best dance music. So I was there dancing. Maybe I'm bidding on something in the silent auction and probably losing. I don't think I ever won something in a silent auction. Or having fun with those that I came with, right? Like, I'm having a great time. But half the group was there just working the crowd and surveying for like potential business opportunities throughout the entire evening. And they were doing the dreaded small talk, which, the typical small talk conversation I'm talking about. The one where like, what do you do is usually within like the first 3 questions. Like, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? And yeah, that's not me. Like, probably why I don't really like networking events, because they feel kind of just shallow. Like, everyone is just there to try to find something they can benefit from. I prefer mutual connections with people that I find interesting. I remember my mom like always thinking it was so weird because when she would ask me, like, what do your friends do for a living? And about 60% of the time I couldn't tell her. Or I would have this like really generic answer, like, oh, I don't, they're in sales or they're in marketing. And she would always ask me, like, how do you not know what your friend does for a living? And my response was always the same. I'm like, because that's not why I'm friends with them. Like, that isn't what we connect on. In fact, when I'm with my friends, it's probably the last thing I want to talk about is work. Because when I bring people into my life, it's not because I need them or they're going to benefit me financially. It's because I want them there. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I don't seek out individuals that would bring value to my life. In fact, I firmly believe that everyone you allow in your life should bring some value, because if they aren't, then why are they there? But value can mean a lot of things. Like, this could be something as simple as a workout partner. Like, maybe they're giving me motivation to go to the gym on a regular basis, or they're always like up to try a new fitness routine. Maybe they're like the Peloton fanatic like me, so I could just indulge in all of the Peloton related conversations and I don't have to worry about annoying them or having them thinking I'm weird that I like cannot wait for the New York the New York offices of Peloton to be open so that I can go to a class live. Because let me tell you, when I start talking about Peloton, I can go on for quite a bit. But, maybe it's something as simple as that. Maybe it could be this confidant that's just always there when you want to vent or maybe get a different perspective. Because let's face it, your spouse or your significant other can't and honestly shouldn't be expected to be everything you need in your life. Like that's why you have friends or you have a social circle. They give you different outlets to complement what's already in your life. But never in my life have I surrounded myself with people due to their status or how much money they had. And part of this is because, if I'm being honest, I haven't really found a correlation between status and money and interesting human beings. And in fact, the more money people have, especially those that were born with money, usually are some of the most dull people I have ever met. And I care so little about people's status or money that's usually why I forget to ask what they even do. Because think about it. If you could sit down with someone that grew up with a trust fund and never had to work too hard for anything in their life, or you could sit down with someone that had to overcome some crazy obstacle in their lives, which do you think would be more interesting? And listen, I'm not saying that people that have money is bad or that all people born with money are boring. That's not true either. I'm just saying that between the two, people that have lives that are not perfect or they've been through some sort of struggle of some sort and they come out the other side, they just tend to be more interesting to me. I also put people that are self sufficient and then weren't just given things, I put them in really high regard because I've always prided myself in being an independent woman. Like I grew up with support from my parents and I was very lucky for that, but I didn't just get whatever I wanted. Like they took care of the necessities like shelter, food, clothing, education, which I do consider a necessity. But from a young age, they started to instill in me the value of hard work and money through chores. And I would work for my $5 a week allowance. And listen, I don't know what it was or what it is now. I guess I should probably figure that out sooner rather than later. But at the time, it was $5 a week. And it was hard work. And I am not exaggerating. Okay. Especially in the summer when my mom was like, oh, now you guys have all this extra time because you're not in school. So now you can do more. And my brother and I would get this yellow notepad, like the whole thing. And the entire page would be filled with chores that we had to do for that week before we were allowed to go do whatever we wanted to do, go play with our friends, etc. And my brother and I would bargain on how we were going to divvy them up, but we worked together to get them done like as fast as possible so that we could go have fun. So when I was finally old enough to work, which in Illinois was 15, I got my first job and it was at Culver's fast food joint, kind of like a burger joint that started in the Midwest. And it was in the drive-thru, which actually was really fun. I actually really liked it. But from the time I was 15 up until being laid off in April, I have almost consistently been working for 24 straight years. And the only breaks I have taken were for my first semester in college because my parents told me that I wasn't allowed to work because they wanted me to focus on school. Of course, they realized that extra time wasn't going towards my studies, but rather sorority and fraternity parties. So they stopped giving me a weekly allowance and told me, like, get back to work. Good decision. And when I quit my job in November, I took a month and a half off between roles, which was really like the first time I had ever done that. Every other time I switched jobs, I would have like my last day on a Friday and I would start the following Monday. So essentially, I have been working for 283 and a half months with minimal breaks up until April of 2022. And all of this is really in service of my own independence. Like, I didn't want to have to rely on anyone. And I think a big driver of this was my place in the world, simply being a woman. As an elder millennial, I grew up in the age of divorce. My parents were divorced, and it seemed like everyone I knew had either parents that were divorced or they were married and miserable. And during the divorce, It was much more common for the woman to be in need of financial support than the man. And society has long expected women to bear the brunt of household duties while the man was the financial provider. And this societal expectation impacts women in so many ways, like being looked at as selfish if women don't want kids. To quote Pope Francis himself, the choice to not want children is selfish. But when women choose to have kids, they're more likely than not lacking support from that same society, including the father of the child. Maternity leave is not a guarantee, even for full time moms, especially if you aren't salary based. And just because you have mat leave, it doesn't mean you get paid your full salary during that time period, which many women or households can't afford partial salary. Healthcare is extremely expensive, with the average out of pocket cost for just having the baby $3,000 in the US as of 2019. And that's just giving birth. And listen, most of the US does not have just $3,000 sitting around. Okay. And that doesn't include supporting that child with food and shelter and clothing and healthcare and education. Like all of that adds up. Where I live in Chicago, the two daycares that we are considering for our newborn are between $2,000 and $3,100 per month. And that's part time. So that's all the financial elements of having a kid, but there's also unpaid care, right? Like women are more likely to be responsible for household duties and childcare, whether they're working or not. It's this dynamic that makes women more likely to pull back on their careers or paid work, which then in turn creates a dynamic of dependence of women on men for their family's financial stability. And unfortunately, there are so many women that are in relationships or marriages that they want to get out, but they simply can't afford to. And this is one of my driving forces for financial independence. Not that I'm looking for a way out from my marriage. Like, that's not the case. I just simply don't want to ever be in a bad situation at any point in my life because I can't afford to change it ever. Now, after saying all of that, now I'm married and, and my relationship is very much a partnership. Like Christian and I have always pretty much split everything 50-50. We have separate bank accounts and we contribute equally to our shared accounts to pay for household expenses. And as we get ready to bring this little girl into the world, we've started having conversations about how are we going to divvy up the household and childcare duties so that they're equal. And it's one of the many things that I love about Christian is this belief that women should focus on education and career, and the relationship should be an equal partnership in every way. And he wants a partner that has her own goals and success and is supportive every step of the way of that, including of my current step. You know, when I lost my job at 13 weeks pregnant, he immediately made it very clear that he didn't want me stressing about money. He wanted to make sure that I took the time to enjoy the pregnancy, but also figure out what was next in my career. His priority is my happiness, and he's more than willing to support me as I figure out what that looks like for the next chapter in my life and in our family's life. And while I completely appreciate it, it comes with this feeling of lost independence for me. Like for the first time since I graduated college at 21, I am financially dependent. And that's scary. And it makes me uncomfortable. Now, because I'm further along in my career, I have some investments and I have savings. But with a baby coming up, the last thing I want to do is start draining those accounts, right? So for now, I have my severance pay and unemployment, which is not enough to match my portion of the typical expenditures. So hence my financial dependence. Which, speaking of unemployment, let's talk about unemployment for a second, because this is my first time filing for unemployment. And you know what? I feel totally fine collecting unemployment. Like I pay 35% of my income in taxes. I have never asked for support from my state or the federal government. And I didn't even try to collect the COVID payout. So you know what? It's time to get some of that hard-earned tax money back from the government. But through this process, I've gained a whole new perspective on the unemployment benefit of my fellow Americans. And let me tell you, I never want to hear someone act like just because someone's living on unemployment, they're living this like high life while they're unemployed. First of all, I qualify for about 24% of my take home pay. Now, you try to tell me that if someone loses their job suddenly, they can only collect 24% of what they were making, that income would suffice, especially considering most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck with very little parachute of savings. And imagine if they have dependents. Like, I don't think so. 24% is not going to cut it. Secondly, the process to get started is super complicated and it takes a while. Like, I filed for unemployment on April 24th, and it took over a month to even start collecting payments. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that delay could really put you behind just to even get started. So when I started filing for unemployment, the online application, I went to go fill it out and it wasn't working. So I had to call and I had to do it all over the phone. And in that conversation, she was like, "Okay, everything's all set." And let me tell you, that was not the case. And while a lot that you do is online, all the actual important communication is through the postal service or through a fax machine. So please tell me why in 2022 we are still using fax machines for anything when you can scan and email things so much easier. Like fax machines, especially if you're unemployed. What unemployed person has access to a fax machine? The only fax machine that I know that exists is like when I worked at a company and like they have the obligatory fax machine in some stock room in case it's needed for some reason, right? But like if someone's unemployed, it's not like we all have fax machines sitting at our house. We don't even have printers nowadays. So like it also just seems a little unfair. And the USPS, if there is a whole site, and actually in Illinois, there's 2 sites that you have to manage to be dedicated to this process. How is there not a contact or email feature for communication? I made my own website for this podcast, and I have an email feature. How is that not something that's included? Like, I don't understand. I was sent a letter for an interview in the US Postal Service because they had some questions. They couldn't just call me, couldn't email me, even though they had all that information. I got a typed letter. And within that letter, it said, you're going to have an interview and here's the date and here's the time. And if that time doesn't work for you, then here is a form you need to fill out and mail it back. But if that was the case, by the time I would have actually done that, I would have missed the interview anyway. Like there's no way the turnaround time would have worked. And then after, so I didn't. I was like, okay, I'm going to have this interview at 11. I don't know what questions they have, but let's do it. They didn't even show. They were no shows for the interviews, which then further delayed my first payment. So then I got another interview letter. And this time they did call. Oh, but by the way, I had to fax them some stuff prior. It's like I literally was like, "Christian, can you fax this at your job for me?" Because I was like, where else am I doing this? And the questions that they had were because the info that woman on the phone had entered on my behalf was wrong. Shocker. So she said I was fired, not laid off, which wasn't the case. She also said that I was out of the country, even though I was literally walking down the streets of Chicago when I was on the call. And she failed to actually mention the next steps to trigger the payments. So once you're approved for a payment, to continue to get benefits, you have like these tasks that you have to do regularly or the payment just stops. They don't tell you, it just stops. So you have to fill out this work search details every week, showing that you're actively trying to get a job, which, all right, fine, I get that. But you also have to certify every other week on a specified day which that day is only mentioned in the very first letter you get, and it is not noted anywhere online in your profile, in your any other communication. So if you miss it, there are no reminders, there are no notifications. You just miss it. And then it triggers another interview, which then delays payment. And what I mean by certification is that you fill out this survey every other week, which is so pointless. It literally takes 2 seconds, and you're like, I am searching for a job. I have not turned one down. I am available for work. My address hasn't changed. Like questions like that. And I will say, I'm glad that I had the interview because it proved very informative because there was no communication of any of this that I had seen throughout the process. And it really got me thinking. I consider myself an intermediate in technology. Like I've used computers since I was 14 because that's when they were available for household use, which that makes me feel old. But I also launched this podcast where I record, I edit, I publish. I launched a website myself. I launched a YouTube channel, social media channels where I produce and I edit all of the content myself. I may not be building my own computer code, but I can comfortably navigate the internet. But with all of that, I struggle to understand the process. So when it comes to those that are not computer savvy or maybe English isn't their first language, like what support do they have? How are they navigating this? And all of this is for less than a quarter of my pay, which doesn't even pay my bills. I did an interview for a podcast recently where I was asked what made me the most uncomfortable since I had been laid off. And my answer was not having an income. Not getting a paycheck isn't just a matter of physical uncomfortability, like how am I going to pay my mortgage, etc. But it's emotional. Like it hits different. At first, I felt embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I was so excited about this new job and that I had lost it so quickly. I knew the layoffs had nothing to do with me or my abilities, but still, just having no job felt embarrassing. Like, what would I say when I got that question? Like, what do you do? What do I put on my LinkedIn? And listen, these are superficial, external moments, but I was dreading them. I didn't want people to think differently of me, and I didn't want them to think I was like defective in some way. I felt ashamed. Shame that I was not holding up my end of the bargain in our relationship at a time when we were facing a massive increase in expenses with this child. I felt like I was letting him down. He agreed to marry this independent woman who had her own career and could take care of herself. And now he was having to support me. I felt scared that I don't know what tomorrow brings. Like I'm a planner and I always have been. And to not know what I'll be doing in 3, 6, 9 months is scary. The only thing that I do know is that I'll be giving birth because listen, like she's coming. There's not much I can do about it now. But in terms of my career, I honestly have no idea. And that's slightly terrifying. But then I started to have multiple conversation with Christians and friends and family and old colleagues. And my mindset really started to shift because they weren't looking at me differently. They still saw me as the independent woman Beyonce would be willing to sing about. You know that song. Neo maybe too. I received some very important and much needed commentary like, you work so hard your whole life. Take this time for yourself. You've earned it. Or use this time as a gift. Like you get to enjoy being pregnant and focus on this beautiful time in your life. Or you're one of the most resilient and strong females I've ever met. Like you'll be fine. And I started to realize that the only person that was putting this pressure on myself was me. I was making myself feel less than in this moment, not other people. I wasn't treating myself with the same empathy that I would give to anyone I know in the same circumstance. And that really needed to change Being laid off doesn't have to be the scarlet letter I was making it out to be. Not knowing what's next is scary. But what makes it manageable is realizing that I have an amazing support system emotionally, mentally, and yeah, in this case, financially. I had to accept that sometimes we all need a little extra help, even those that consider themselves fiercely independent. There will be times in our lives that we don't have the answers, and sometimes we don't know what's next. But I am lucky to be able to take the time to figure it out. I'm blessed to be in a position where I can focus on self reflection so that I can make the right choice for myself and for my growing family. Just like the midlife crisis, being dependent does not have to be a negative. Even for those of us that pride ourselves in not needing anyone, the reality is that there will be times in your life when we are all dependent on someone. Maybe that's for some financial support when you're trying to get back on your feet. Maybe it's a shoulder to cry on when you're dealing with a loss. Whatever the situation may be, just remember that dependence is only a weakness if you let it be one. For now, I am financially dependent, but like everything, this situation is only temporary. I will get back on my feet. I will figure out what the next step is. And taking this time now will give me the foundation to be happier on the other side. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Join me on my social channels to get more content and inspiration. You can follow my Almost Midlife Crisis on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can also check out my new YouTube channel with videos of the episodes and shorts to keep you entertained all week. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast to make sure you are always up to date on the latest episodes. And if you want written transcripts, you can subscribe and get them right to your inbox at myalmostmidlifecrisis.com. Until next time.